I don't know.
Okay, to start the meeting, the first item is election of a chair. So we're looking for nominations for chair for the next year.
Warren, I'll nominate you.
Second.
Are you willing to continue? I hope so, but I want, but it's legit.
If anybody else wants to do it, that's fine with me. My feelings won't be hurt. So.
Such a pro.
Okay, if there's no other nominations, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So I'm chair for another year. So I got, how many years left? This is the second year or third year of our appointment. I think all three of us are in the same.
I think this is going to be the last year of your appointments.
Okay,
Everybody except Susan, I believe. No, something's wrong with it. Everybody except Grace.
Be more staggered, I thought.
I thought it was more
you're on the
staggered.
same schedule.
Yeah.
term?
Huh?
Is it 3 years?
It's 3 years. I thought this was the second year, but
I thought it was just two.
I thought
But
it was two.
We do have a stagger problem in that there's 6 and 1, and 6 of you are all
That's a problem.
expiring on the same year.
okay.
Most committees are two.
Pardon?
Most committees are 2 years.
Oh, okay. So next item of business is election of vice chair.
Nominate Ken Potter.
I'll second.
Wait.
Hey, you're from New Orleans, you're in charge of vice.
You're in charge of vice.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ken's elected.
I could say nay and make it feel better. I'm being recorded, I gotta quit doing this.
You said, I didn't look at the agenda.
So next item of business is approval of minutes from 5/17.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of 5/17.
Second.
All in favor of approval? Aye. Opposed?
Abstain.
Minutes are approved. So the next item is appointment to member to the Stormwater Utility Board.
Warren, I'm willing to do it.
You want to do it?
Yes, since I started the whole mess.
Start the whole mess.
Yeah,
Well,
it needs some upgrading.
if anybody else wants to challenge her, get the. If not, all in favor of Susan being our representative on Stormwater Utility Board?
Do we have, are we gonna have 3 or just one
Yeah,
or
we've
what?
got 3.
3 of you.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. So right now it's me, Ken, and
No, I
You raised
wasn't
your hand?
volunteering. I was simply going to second the motion.
Jim, do you want to still be on it?
I'll stay
So-
I'll stay on the board. That's-
Okay. Who else wants to do it? Warren, Ken, Dave,
I'm already on it, so,
Okay.
sorry.
you're already
You're on
on
the
it.
utility, that's right.
I can't be twice, so
Yeah,
I'm
and
recused.
one of you two.
Well, it's already. Oh, okay, so Warren, you want to be on the board on the storm?
I don't care. I could be on if no one else wants to do it.
Well, okay, I'm trying to
If
get,
Ken wants to do it, that's fine with me too.
Either way, I mean.
if it's Susan, Ken and me, would that be okay with you?
Pardon?
Would it be okay if it's Susan, Ken and myself?
That's fine with me.
Okay,
It doesn't make much difference because it's the same night, so I'm gonna be there anyways. Okay,
So,
so do we have to have a motion on that?
David makes the
So-
motion.
Okay,
Wouldn't hurt.
I so moved.
you're moving Susan, Ken and Jim.
Right.
Thank you.
Second.
Be all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So the next one is appointment to the Conservancy Lands Committee, and Grace is currently a designee.
Happy to continue doing so unless someone else would
I
like to.
would like to do it.
Okay, great.
Been on storm on CLC for,
Was that a burden?
I've been to one lovely meeting.
needs some improvement. I served on it. Grace, we haven't met, but I've been on it since 2004 up until 2022.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Okay, please.
Do you want to nominate Susan, do
I
the
nominate
honors?
Susan. So moved.
Second.
All in favor of Susan being on that board also?
Aye.
Aye. Susan, you're on approved then?
Yeah.
Okay. Next item of business is the Rock Ridge Development Plan.
Yeah, I'll give a brief intro on this, and right off the bat, I've got a typo in the agenda. They are not requesting fees in lieu for peak rate control anymore, just for infiltration and recharge.
Okay.
I typed up a memo to kind of summarize everything that had happened so far with the proposal in 2020 and now this current one from last year and ongoing into this year. I hope, Grace, you got your feet underneath you now. We asked them after much discussion last month to go back and try to get us some more green roofs. And they have done that. I think, I am recommending that we approve this fee in lieu request for infiltration at this point. Justin and Nick or Nick, did you have anything prepared? Do you want to go through anything, talk about the changes you made perhaps? And do you want to drive?
Yeah, if you don't mind, if I could share my screen, I got a couple of slides I could pull up.
All right.
I just need you to enable it for me.
Oh, I'm sorry. You got it now?
Yep, now it's let me do it. Good evening, Justin Zamparty with Beerbecker. I also have Nick Johnson from our office on as well. So I think we all kind of know where the site's located. This again is our site layout where we've got 3 buildings, and where we're planning to do our stormwater management is we've got green roof areas on the back plaza areas on all 3 buildings, and then we've got 2 underground systems, the larger one being within the center of the parking lot, and then the other one being along the entrance drive. So some of the comments from the last meeting was to increase our green roof areas. And so this was the layout that we had previously, where we had approximately 2,000 square feet of green roof per building on the backside. And we've increased that overall by approximately 60%. So we've got about 3,200 on each building. So this is kind of the increased area on the backside of building 1, which is approximately 3,500 square feet. On building 2, we've again increased the area to around 3,300 square feet. And then on the backside of building 3, approximately 2,700 square feet. So overall, we went from around 6,000 square feet to just over 9,500 square feet on the green roof areas. As Eric mentioned, we're just seeking fee in lieu for infiltration and recharge. We did also on our underground system, we increased the size of the underground in the middle. We went from 8 rows to 10 to meet our peak flow and volume requirements. And I guess with that, we'll answer any questions that you may have.
Justin, can you show where these planters are located?
Yeah, so let's see, I do have some. So here's kind of an aerial image of the buildings. You can see a little bit of the backside on one. I think I go here. Oop. So this is like on the backside of building 3. So what happens on all these buildings is the underground parking footprint extends out beyond the edge of the actual vertical portion of the building. So there's approximately I think it's like 7,000 square feet of area back here. And so on the back sides of all these buildings, that's kind of where this amenity space is with the green roof areas. And it's a mixture of predominantly like 6-inch green roof systems. And then where we have these, where we're trying to get some larger trees, we're planning on going with a thicker, 12 to 18-inch section to try and get some larger variety of plants up on those areas.
Okay, so in your memo, when you said you'd increase the planter areas, you're talking about the planter areas within that same green roof.
Yeah, so there's some planter areas kind of sprinkled about on the deck space, but these kind of lighter green, kind of circular areas where the trees are the deeper planter sections. On particular on this building, we've got these rectangular footprints kind of around the perimeter, which are kind of the more taller planter wall sections.
Okay, gotcha.
Can you back up and show me that picture of the building?
Yep, sure.
I can't picture okay, this is where,
So this is on building 3, which is on the back side, the most eastern one. So this is kind of looking out to the east, kind of over and down the hill.
And this rendering may not be showing the same footprint that you showed from the.
Yeah, this is an older rendering from the actual green space area.
but that is the roof of the parking garage thing.
Correct. Yeah, the garage footprint extends out. So if you look at kind of back at the floor plan here, so this is kind of the building tower, if you will, where the apartments go up, but the actual underground parking footprint extends out beyond. So we've got this plaza deck space.
So you calculate the evapotranspiration of that area for the trees?
Well, the
Or is the infiltration is what you're looking at?
sure, yeah, I mean, it ends up just being a curve number calculation based off of the green roof area as opposed to a typical roof system.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad to see you made some changes.
Yeah, it's better.
Oh,
I have a question.
actually,
Go ahead.
thank you. How close to or far from the target infiltration number, or I'm not sure if we should say stay on or infiltration, and Eric, you can correct me. My question is, how close or far from the target is this version now? What is there a number?
I think it's about half.
I didn't see, yeah, I
I
didn't.
don't know,
in the
Justin, what it was currently, but what's governing their payment is the recharge number. And that's more like 2-3 inches out of 9 you're getting, maybe,
Okay.
Justin?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't study it close enough.
Yeah, with this, 60% increase in our green roof area, it's still not large enough to kind of move the needle as far as infiltration goes.
Yeah.
Given the overall, small quantity compared to the, overall site area. I think we looked at it and it increased it by less than 2% from what we had before. But like Eric mentioned, recharge is really what's governing our fee in lieu.
Okay, I have a question, and this isn't so much in terms of how are you going to maintain the green roof? Because with our current weather conditions, it's going to be a problem.
Well, we'll have a stormwater maintenance agreement, prepared for all the stormwater facilities on site, and they've got, maintenance staff on property that will be, taken care of.
Somebody will be watering it. That's my concern.
Correct.
That would be part of their maintenance requirements.
Okay,
I think, Susan, this is the third green roof system now that's come in since I've been here.
okay,
And I think probably come in at all. I don't think there were any. Since Madison and the county changed their ordinances and we're following that, this is the only way to go in a lot of situations,
Yeah.
and it is problematic for just this reason.
yeah, I was thinking, if the grass dies, it's not going to get any transpiration.
Since these will be in patio or plaza areas, they'll
It'll be
probably
easier.
There's
be
incentive.
better maintained than something that's lost on the top of a roof that nobody ever sees.
Yeah, so these areas are really, kind of designated for two purposes, one being the green roof, but also, the amenity space. So it'll certainly be something that they'll want to maintain to keep looking nice and fresh for their tenants.
Can I move to accept the staff recommendation of fee in lieu?
Okay,
Second.
is there a second? All in favor of approval?
Or do you want
I've
to
got
discuss
one
more?
question of the committee. Are you guys comfortable with this? Because I remember the first time this project was suggested. You weren't that happy with,
In my opinion, it's the best we can do. We've moved it as far as we can. If they're gonna build something there, I don't know what else needs to be done. That's my opinion, just my personal.
okay,
Yeah, I'm not crazy about the site either, but that's
Yeah.
neither here nor there as far as we're concerned.
okay.
I did want to note before, in your conclusions, you said South Pond is downstream, provides additional stormwater treatment, and South Pond isn't very effective, as far as we could tell, is providing any kind of stormwater treatment. It's pretty good at reducing flood peaks, but I wouldn't say it helps the water quality at all at this point. So all in favor of adapting the staff's recommendation for approval? Aye. Opposed? So the motion's carried.
Thanks, Eric, for the really good memo, and thanks, Justin, for the presentation.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Enjoy
you,
the
Jeff.
rest of your night.
So next item then is overview of the stormwater ordinance. And I'm the one that asked this be put on the agenda. We have some new members. And we talk about a lot of these issues on the ordinance, but I'm sure a lot of you, or any of you actually read the ordinance. It's pretty lengthy. So I thought it might be a good idea just to go through it quickly, because there are like 3 or 4 points that we really talk about. And so I've just prepared a brief summary of that. And I'll go through page by page. And if you have any questions on any part of it, let's just talk about it then. So overall, the mission statement of the Water Resource Management Commission is to develop, guide, interpret, and administer policy, technical standards, and ordinances to protect, manage, and enhance the water resources in the city of Middleton for the benefit of the citizens. and communities within the watersheds. And I got that statement right out of the ordinance, like a lot of these statements in here.
You should just make that up.
I didn't make that up. And for the betterment of mankind overall. I think you could reduce it right down to is protect and manage and enhance the water resource of Middleton would be good enough. So in this summary, I've included the stormwater discharge quality, which includes sediment and phosphorus control, stormwater discharge quantity, and our ordinance addresses flood peaks, but not runoff volume, infiltration and recharge, talk about compliance goals. I mentioned partnerships, but I didn't put a slide in for that one. And then maintenance agreements and references. So the first one is sediment and phosphorus control, sediment and phosphorus. So for new developments, the practice shall be designed to reduce 80% of the total suspended solids, which is TSS, within the stormwater runoff based on the average annual rainfall record as compared to no runoff management controls. And for a redevelopment, the reduction is 40%. The primary practice to achieve this reduction is construction of wet ponds to settle the sediments or biofilters and infiltration ponds. Design is generally done by a rainfall runoff model like SLAM. And it uses the average annual rainfall, which is 1981. While I listed sediment and phosphorus, our ordinance doesn't really talk about phosphorus at all. So we use TSS as a surrogate for reducing phosphorus control. And I thought that was kind of strange that we don't even mention phosphorus in there, since that's one of the main things that we're really trying to control.
Warren, is this something that should maybe get changed in
Yeah.
the ordinance?
Yeah,
I mean,
well, a lot of
it's
the things I'm
doable.
talking about are changes, and I think that's one thing we should mention phosphorus.
Yes,
And since that's the main thing we're trying to do, it seems like, you know, when we first wrote the ordinance back in 79, we're just looking at flood peaks,
right.
and then we changed it to sediment. And at that time, there wasn't that much concern, but well, there was concern, but we didn't address phosphorus.
Yeah, the issue was the state had regulations for sediment, but did not have regulations for phosphorus at that time. Now
Okay.
they do have a regulation
Yes.
for
Well, it
phosphorus.
also would be helpful to council members to understand some of these finer points.
Right.
Especially the phosphorus.
Right. And the ordinance also has provisions for oil and grease control, temperature control, protection of wetlands, special resource waters, and protection of water supply and wells. And we don't really talk about any of those issues very much. We might want to think about protection of water supply and wells. So since we're getting salt in them right now,
Yeah,
and that's an issue that probably should be addressed in our ordinance too. Because I think salt and phosphorus are probably the two major problems that we're gonna have down the road.
what about nitrate coming in from outside farm areas? And getting into the water, drinking supply?
We do have an ordinance chapter just for wellhead protection.
There is something right in there, right? But we don't,
Probably not what you're,
pardon,
probably not what you're heading towards with this, but
no.
Yeah.
Flood discharges is the next one. And so for new development, stormwater management practice shall be designed and implemented to maintain post-development peak runoff discharge rates for the 1, 2, 5, 10, 25, 100, and 200 for the 24-hour design storms. So not to exceed those rates for each respective design storm under pre-development conditions. And we added the 200, but that's really not in the ordinance right now. That's another recommendation that we're gonna make.
it's in the county ordinance, so we're bound to follow it, but it's not yet in ours.
So the primary practice for control flood peaks is construction of stormwater detention ponds. And designs are based on hydro calculations using a rainfall runoff model like TR55, which is from urban hydrology for small watersheds. And rainfall depths used for the 24-hour design storm are based on NOAA's Atlas 14. And that Atlas, that's based on rainfall records for 30-year period, 19 71 to 2001.
Is it back to two thousand
Or
and one?
I'm not sure what it is. I think that is. Is that right, Ken? It's a 30-year period. I think it stops in 2001. So it's really not updated. That's one reason we're going to the 200-year flood design, because as we did with our floodplain mapping with we adjusted the 100-year rain based on, I can't remember his name, from UW.
Oh, yeah.
So it essentially increased it to the 200-year flood.
Dan Wright.
Right, thank you.
Yeah. Eric, I had a question. When you use that rainfall record for it's like 3 inches, say for 100 years, if you, over a 24-hour period, 3 inches of rainfall, if you used for a hydrograph, you routed it through, it would only be like a tenth or 1500ths per hour. So how do they use the maximum for 3 inches at one time, or they route the whole rainfall period of 24 inches? How do they choose a design storm?
Well, it used to be a type 2 storm, so the bulk of that rainfall is happening in a couple of hours. They switched to an MSE 3 or 4, which is a little bit different, and I don't know the finer points, but it's roughly the same.
But it's still, yeah, it's roughly the same, and the point is, it's not distributing that rainfall evenly across that time period. It
No.
does squeeze it all in, so there is a peak discharge,
There's a peak increment of precip.
sure.
So
That
it's kind
generates
of,
the highest flow.
it kind of kids us a little bit saying it's 3 inches, depends on how you distribute that 3 inches over
Sure does.
24 hours.
Sure
That's
It's
a
in
big
an
deal.
hour, you got a problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but if you put a tenth an hour, you don't have any problems at all.
Right,
Right.
So it looks like a bell curve. Bulk of the rainfall concentrated around the middle of the day.
Yeah,
Slam.
they don't pattern after an existing storm.
there is no such thing.
There are different distributions for different parts of the country, but none of them are an average rainfall over a 24-hour period.
Yeah. Okay, I was just going back to, it's neither here nor there, my experience with designing spillways for the Bureau of Reclamation's unit hydrograph analysis. Anyway, infiltration and recharge. For all infiltration, all development practice shall be designed so that the post-development infiltration volume is at least 90% of the pre-development infiltration volume. Design of infiltration basins shall be done using a rainfall runoff model like SLAM, or recharge, using the Madison runoff file based on the average annual rainfall designated by DNR to be 1981. And we've talked about that 1981 rainfall for a long time, not being representative of current conditions. And so I think there are some recommendations that we might make to adjust that. And I think Jim came up with one using a DNR file from 1980, that your discussion with Herb.
Yeah,
And that would be increases up to, I think, 3 inches versus
Is that what it was?
2.6 or something like that.
if you say so. I can't remember, but you're right.
Okay.
I mean, just as an aside, this whole, I guess we have the authority to choose a rainfall file for this purpose. However, we would be, then every developer that comes in, Middleton will be different than every other place. And they're gonna say, if you guys are different and making it harder on us, and we're not gonna develop here, we're gonna go to Verona. And the council, of course, will have a conniption and say, we can't do that, we must develop here because all development is good development and we want, I shouldn't say this out loud, should I? But anyway, you get the idea. So the point is, the reason we chose this number is because it's consistent throughout all the communities, and
If the county changed it,
not that
not that one.
no. The city of Madison did change their peak flow and we followed suit, or we hope to follow suit. But that's not regulated by the state. That's a local
Okay.
authority.
Okay,
The pollution part, which is what we're talking about here, is regulated by the state. We have to meet that minimum. We can go higher, Well, actually, we can't go higher, can
Well,
we?
we just say, you said we can't.
Well,
We shouldn't, you shouldn't because our developers may move away.
Well,
from us.
I'm not sure I
And
said
I'm not
that
sure
way.
that's the case, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure we're allowed to go higher than the state pollution control requirement. Eric, you want to chime in?
The developer's amendment, I think only talks about control. So one of the things we looked at last year was if we could put in a phosphorus requirement,
Mhm.
which then
Yes.
would effectively create a bigger volume control requirement. That was, I think that was still on the table when we were talking about it.
Right.
But that would be another, strange thing to Middleton.
But I do believe if it's based on the phosphorus number, you are, as far as DNR is concerned, you're allowed to do that. You can target the phosphorus number, which would be a more restrictive, aggressive stormwater management thing to do.
I always thought the stormwater ordinance was a minimum we had to do, and we wanted to, we can make it more strict.
That was true until the developer's amendment, I believe.
Yeah.
Which was,
So this is something that was, I think, brought to the table by a local developer and had state statute changed to say that a municipality had to follow a uniform state standard. And it was all about this 90% infiltration versus requiring more. And that was seen as, too onerous on certain development sites.
Yeah.
So we are kind of hamstrung by this with trying to increase our regulations. There's an out for flood control. So if we can prove that this is helping us with flood control, then that gives us an avenue. For the recent Red Tail Ridge development, the city attorneys were okay with us asking for 100% infiltration because of the way the zoning worked. They weren't trying to zone it R4. They were going through this planned development district process, which allows us to ask for a little bit more, I guess, basically.
The average annual rainfall in 1981 is a little bit of misnomer too, because actually it's a 9-month period or 8-month period from April through October.
I think it goes to November.
Through November, so it doesn't include the winter period when we don't get infiltration because of frozen ground. So, and also it's the largest storm, I think, within the year that really influences the thing. So like in that 1981, there's a August storm or something like 2.6 inches. So the rest of the whole year doesn't mean too much, except if you have one just before the larger storm occurs, then your ponds may have some water in them. So it's a little bit different than it sounds as far as I'm concerned, but that's the way it is. So recharge shall be determined from the Wisconsin Geologic and Natural History Survey's 2009 report on groundwater recharge in Dane County.
And since I don't know, but what is recharge exactly?
Yeah, that's a confusing thing with me too. Recharge and infiltration are the same thing.
Okay.
And in that thing I sent you a couple months ago, Randall, and it's attached to this agenda again.
Okay.
When we say infiltration, it means water that's not leaving the site.
Right.
So that could be percolating into the ground or it could be evapotranspirating. Recharge is only that percolating into the ground component.
Okay.
So for that last development we were just looking at, what we discussed last month was that DSPS would not allow them to try to percolate water into the ground.
Because it's
So they're just they can't build a facility that's going to drain in.
right.
So that's why they're stuck with that recharge number.
Okay.
And all they were trying to do was get more evapotranspiration by providing some more green space, more green roof.
Yeah. Got it.
I think that's the first time we really had a consideration of evapotranspiration though, that I can remember.
I don't know.
But it's a good idea to do it because obviously ET is a big deal. Loss of ET. So runoff volume control. And I look back at the DNR site and they have some wording in their stormwater control manual. It states that stormwater runoff volume should be kept too close to pre-development conditions as practical. And we don't have any provisions in our ordinance about runoff control. And I'm suggest that we look at that and try and do something about that. The only thing we address is within a closed watershed that we should have 100% infiltration instead of 80.
You want to define closed
90.
watershed?
Pardon?
Do you want to define a closed?
No.
Oh.
Tiedeman's Pond. How about that?
right,
Yeah.
Tiedeman's Pond.
Striker's Pond. Wasn't closed in 2018.
Gravers,
Or
I'm gonna go to
overflowed.
Gravers Pond, talk about that?
Yeah.
No, we're gonna talk about that.
But we don't, I mean, that's not a bad question or thought is to, do we want to formalize geographically what are closed watersheds in the city of Middleton? We don't have a map right now to point to.
We should do that.
We should.
Or a flood, how about a flood prone?
Well, yeah. You're saying use
It's not
that?
closed, but there's trouble downstream and
Mhm.
I think that'd be a good starting point that,
I think it would be real helpful.
yeah.
And it would make it, I'm looking at it from council's viewpoint, it would help them understand.
visualize where these areas are.
Because with the 2018 storm, there was a lot of confusion over what happened at Stricker and Tiedemann's versus Graber Pond, which had way more damage to residences and so on.
Mhm.
And the emphasis went on to Tiedemann and Stricker instead of Graber.
That's something that could be done.
And since approximately 2/3 of the annual precipitation is lost by evapotranspiration, this is a large volume of water that now enters the watershed as a result of the increased impervious area. It doesn't allow evapotranspiration to occur. So this is a big number that we've really ignored for all these years, and that's something we ought to look at. So I made some suggested changes that are for consideration when we revise our ordinance. Possible solutions to be incorporated include that will help to replace the loss of evapotranspiration include incorporate plants and trees that are high in ET in open spaces, use green infrastructure wherever possible. For watersheds where a pond exists, provide storage space around any pond to accommodate the increase in runoff. Also for watersheds that have a pond, provide an adequate outlet structure to accommodate the increases of runoff.
Yeah, in your suggestion here, are these ponds, whether they're quote unquote natural or an already constructed?
Well, in my mind, it would include Graver Pond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of another, I can't think of another example.
Well, you know, the city's going to keep on growing. This ordinance is going to stand the time forever.
Jim, even what about the Middleton Hills ponds? That could be,
That's a built pond.
it's a built pond, but it still could, with maybe some better vegetation around it. It's not bad.
But there's no new development. Well, very little new development is going to occur in that watershed, right? I think there's 2 open lots maybe potential. So there's nothing else that can be built.
Yeah, there's
No.
nothing else that would go into the detention ponds.
Right.
We could have construction around Esser's Pond, though.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I suppose, I guess, or some open.
Well, we've talked about it, potential for that, doing that when we did our floodplain.
Okay, that's right.
Redevelopment. I mean, that's
Redeveloping. yeah.
pretty full.
Yeah. And another one that's not included in our ordinance, which is groundwater flooding. And our ordinance currently doesn't address groundwater flooding, and Ken's talked about this over a number of years now. So Middleton experienced groundwater flooding in areas next to Tiedemann's Pond, Stricker's Pond, and Hidden Oak subdivision. Some suggestions that I came up with to address the potential problems are require developers to provide a map of groundwater elevations in low-lying areas and next to ponds where possible problems could occur. And if groundwater levels look like a potential problem, require a rainfall runoff model to evaluate the impact on development of groundwater levels. then that's actually a flooding problem that if we did a floodplain map, we could look at groundwater flooding and zone those areas.
So this is just anywhere where water goes above the normal level onto surrounding areas.
Right.
Because we even had that at Middleton Hills.
I'm not sure what that, I missed what you're saying.
So when the water goes up high enough to go over onto the surrounding normal ground.
Okay,
Middleton Hills did it too.
well,
Not bad.
we're talking about like down by the park and that kind of stuff, but
Mhm.
during 2018.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that still wasn't, to me, that's not a groundwater issue. That was still surface water
It's a flood
exceeding the
issue.
capacity of.
Yeah,
of the
okay.
pond.
We gotta keep in mind precepts increasing right now, right?
Mhm. Sort of. Not this week.
Hey,
So those.
Could have fooled my lawn, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, right now,
Been out there every day watering.
I just drove by Tiedemann's Pond and it's getting a little dry out there.
It's-
So we're gonna be able to walk across it like the old days pretty soon.
Yeah.
Since we put in that pump, we've solved the problem.
Drive by there and go,
Have we used that pump at all?
Oh, sure. And it works,
It worked.
but I think we're about 4/10 below our minimum elevation for Tiedemann now.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, we've got a permit that says we're,
I know, but what happens if we go below?
well, we can't,
what's
Pray
that?
for rain.
it's a drought.
Homes built these days
Yeah.
are basically.
Yeah.
So
That's-
this way you know where the ground
That's the
is.
part, right.
So the ordinance also has a revision for fees in lieu of compliance, like we just administered on that other site. So the developer can't meet our ordinance. They have the ability, or we have the ability to, if we want, accept fees in lieu of.
That's
I've got a question on this. If there's a project that really shouldn't occur, and I'm thinking more like the one we just approved within initial discussion, is this committee able to say absolutely, it can't be done because it would be disastrous and not grant any approval?
I think we could do that, but we never have.
Well.
I mean, don't approve they don't meet the ordinance.
Standards?
We don't
and-
have to accept fees in lieu of.
Yeah.
They have to meet the ordinance.
Yeah,
they
that's what
can't-
I'm.
If they
wondering.
can't meet the ordinance, I assume our recommendation back to the council is they have not met the ordinance and passed. What do they do?
But are you suggesting, Susan, that we preemptively deem some property as being undevelopable? Because I think that legally would get us in.
That might be where
Really
the
a problem.
problem is.
I mean,
It's,
I like that idea, but I think that would give us a lot of headaches.
okay, I see where you're coming from. I just remember that meeting where, because of infiltration and into the rock and going
Yeah,
freezing,
yeah.
it sounded like a disaster.
Water tables are rising too, even though we're in the drought right now, but they are rising and
Yeah.
that's that's something that down the road, if we haven't paid attention to it. What are you gonna do? You're gonna drain it, but you're gonna subtile it, right? And which is not something we want. And then you're gonna add more water to the lake and so on and so forth. So we do have to keep in mind that climate's changing.
Yeah,
Can I add something here, Warren?
pardon?
Can I add something here?
Sure.
So this fees in lieu is kind of what's weird about the Middleton ordinance. If this were somewhere else in the state, there are prohibitions on where you can infiltrate. So like on the site tonight, the DNR or the DSPS would then just deem that site exempt from infiltration. They don't have to meet that requirement because it doesn't make good sense for them to try and infiltrate in that spot. Or if there's high groundwater present, evidence of that. What's different about Middleton is we say, okay, you don't have to infiltrate there, but we still want you to pay us this fee. And we're going to collect these fees and go off and, build an infiltration basin someplace where it makes better sense. That's the intent.
Eric,
We've accumulated quite a bit of money over the years, and currently we have like 300,000 roughly.
Yeah, I think it might be a little more
And
than
I
that.
can't remember what projects we actually use it for. Did we use it in Lakeview Park?
I don't know.
I think we probably did, because I don't know how else would have paid for that.
I think so.
And there's that one that goes into right in the Pheasant Branch. It drains right by Parisi's road there. There's a small pond there that we built early on that I think came from fees in lieu of. As you walk by a trail there, I can't remember.
It just a dry depression.
Yeah,
Yeah, there is a pond back there.
yeah.
We should be encouraging trees and
Yes.
developments and that, because that's the best way to deal with groundwater, is to ET it away, right?
Mhm.
Send it to Michigan, but
Mhm.
to the lakes, but trees are really beneficial. I mean,
Yes,
they control temperature, they,
trees and deep-rooted prairie plants.
what's that? And prairie plants.
Yeah,
Yeah,
deep-rooted prairie
combinations
plants.
of those.
So you're suggesting we could use our fees in lieu of to plant more trees?
That
Well, I
could be
think-
real helpful.
Yeah, I think we should be planting more trees.
Where are we planting trees?
It's also,
There's-
Because we had that at the park commission, and there was a suggestion that we need to plant more trees, and the answer was, there's not a lot of good places to plant more trees.
Really?
And-
I would disagree some on that.
Well, I mean, we were looking at forestry, street trees,
Yeah.
parks.
Conservancy lands could use more trees.
Service lands are certainly is an outlet for some places. But there was also suggestion that the city could look to do some private partnerships with some of the developments to get more trees planted in
Yeah,
areas that are not city lands. And I think that would be another really good thing to look at.
yes,
we can encourage developers to
to plant.
put more
Wow.
trees in, yeah,
Mhm.
right, and, I mean, because it makes for much better
I know.
place to live, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an amenity as well as something that helps everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
And there's, that's a zoning thing, right? And the zoning requirements are so many trees, X species, blah, 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 per area for certain developments. I don't know what the details are,
It depends on, if it's a
But-
PDD, it would be specific for that area.
but I think what Ken's saying is, can we get the zoning code changed to enhance density of trees, types of trees
Mhm.
for other benefits like
Right.
groundwater improvements?
Plus, there's cooling,
Yeah,
dealing
all
with
the
the
other
increase in
things.
temperatures.
And the only thing they
The
do,
ET, cools things off.
of course, on the downside, they.
One thing that I've noticed around here is that like West Town and a lot of our parking lots, after all these years, have very few trees
Yes, we
growing.
could use a lot more trees in
When you
parking
have
lots.
trees in like Walmart has no trees after 30 years. And
Mhm.
if you go to places like Arizona, their
Costco,
parking lots look a heck of a lot better. They got a lot more better design of a lot more foliage.
Yeah.
They don't have salt.
Pardon?
They don't have salt.
yes, that's true.
Salt is a problem, you're right.
Yeah. But we could build our pick and save any of those parking lots that really don't have very many trees planted.
Just can't survive.
Warren, can we go back on the fees in lieu of the county, or at least Lakes and Watershed Commission has been pushing the county to develop such a program. And staff seems to be, or county staff seems to be in favor, but they need the staffing to actually implement it. So it's slowly working in progress for the county to develop such a thing.
Has the city's calculation on this fees in lieu changed over the years?
Yeah.
Like the amount?
You guys looked at it a couple years ago, or a couple years maybe before I came on board, but I don't think you changed it. I think it's still the same.
Same.
This came up last year that some of you think we should be increasing our fees.
Mhm.
And I said what Susan just said, that the county's looking at it and maybe we could just kind of piggyback on what they come up with. If that timeline
Yeah,
is,
well, I think it's going to be quite a few years they're at least talking about it, but when the Lakes and Watershed is very much in, the commission is in favor of doing it. Staff had lots of concerns about, they don't have the staffing to get it planned and implemented.
So the city's example may help drive the county to doing this
Yeah.
Yes.
sooner.
Mhm.
Well, it's a real benefit for a developer like the one we talked about, $29,000. That's nothing versus building an infiltration basin, then have to maintain it every 2
Right.
years and do a report. They're getting off the hook.
Well, I'm thinking, when was the last time that fee was set and how many years
That's
of
what I was trying
compounding
to ask.
inflation? We're not charging enough.
We did have an MSA did a study, like you said, and
Yeah, and I don't think you guys ended up adjusting the fee. Or if you did, it was very small adjustment.
well, it'd take more than an inflationary adjustment. I think you have to look at like maybe what would it cost a developer, like in this case, to build an infiltration basin? Would he spend $100,000 to do it? And it wouldn't work, so maybe she just pay $100,000 for fees in lieu of, something like that. I'm not sure how.
I think the issue that MSA, and I didn't really work on that back then, but I think it was so variable, and maybe that's what led to indecision on what to do with it. You know, for that Rock Ridge,
Yeah.
infiltration might have been not so expensive for them to add if they could just allow it from beneath their already planned underground detention system. But for a different site, it might be much more expensive per, you know, whatever, per cubic foot of runoff, or however we want to measure it.
Yeah,
Do we, when developers come in, do we have them quantify, if they put trees in, we don't ask them to quantify the benefit of that? Do we?
no,
I mean, we really ought to go heavy on trees. Trees are gonna help us in so many ways. Aesthetically, dealing with cooling, climate change.
yeah.
And, you know, you gotta pick the right trees and so on and so forth. But neighborhoods with trees are just so much more pleasant than neighborhoods without trees, I think.
Well, some neighborhoods where I walk my dogs have too many trees along the boulevards, and
Well,
the grass is
sometimes
dead,
the-
and I mean, place looks
Yeah,
terrible.
yeah. You have
If
to
you go through
place
the
them.
Meadows area where they plant too many trees on the boulevard, or
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
they're too
you gotta
close
do it
together, the
right.
wrong type of trees.
Yeah, you gotta do it right. You gotta get the right trees in the right places. So
Yeah,
maybe we should put out some kind of standards on that or suggestions on that.
well, it'd be something to consider. Yeah,
City of Madison just went through a process like that. And they do
Does
have,
Madison have,
they've got some standards on the size of the volume. Oh, I'm sorry.
We have a copy, I mean, but I don't think we can find anything on the phone. I could find it, but it wouldn't let me download. Oh.
Mark Wagner, Monday went over some of his suggestions on how we, again, this is for street trees, but it would be applicable for other things too, in terms of trying to have diversity
Getting
and
on this one.
Mhm.
mix of different types of trees.
Right.
So he might be a good person to
He would
You know,
be.
Yeah.
talk to begin with.
Well, his master's is in forestry.
No, he knows his trees.
Yes.
you know, we've been talking about revising the ordinance now for several years, so. With the Eric workload, it's a tough one to get around to.
Yeah, we need to do it. I just want to caution, you know, we talk about these rules. I just think they need to be spelled out. You know, like if there's species of trees we want to prefer, and if there's a specific credit, or, you know, 5 trees equals something. But somebody coming in with a proposal needs to know the rule ahead of time. They can't come in here and have us say, well, I don't really like it. You know, it has to be spelled out. If it's bad news for them, at least they know that going in. It's going to be this extra cost, but I don't think we can leave it to poorly defined. It has to be spelled out ahead of time.
Can't we look at what Madison, how Madison
Yeah,
regulates that? We
well,
don't have to reinvent the wheel.
right.
And remember that we are redoing the zoning code. So that'll come back before this commission
Well, that would be a good time
in a
to
few months, I would
add
guess.
in trees. Working with Mark Wagner on that.
So to finish this up, there's a stormwater management report that's required. So each developer who is granted a stormwater management permit and who has signed and recorded the required maintenance agreement shall submit to the city engineer an annual report on the condition of the site's stormwater management facilities. The annual report shall be completed and sealed by professional engineer currently licensed in the state of Wisconsin. The report shall be submitted every 2 years. It sounds a little strange.
It's not an annual report.
It sounds strange, an annual report every 2 years, but
Yeah.
that's what it says.
I changed the first paragraph to biennial, Warren. It's,
Biennial, yeah. We should change that to biennial.
Yeah, I guess I didn't catch that change.
it's all, it's every 2 years.
Yeah,
First
And-
2 years after development, then every 2 years thereafter.
and I guess we've been talking about this requirement for years, and so the last 4 years or 3 years, we made good progress. So, and we've seen the results of that, and Eric has made some presentations showing how many are in compliance, and if you're not in compliance, the city can force a consulting firm to make that investigation. So I just included some references if you want to go back and read over some information on other past reports by, and so you can look at those if you want. The one, they're kind of lengthy, the one in Stormwater Magazine, if you just go to Stormwater Magazine and Google that, Stormwater Magazine November, you could find that report, and that's probably the shortest one if you want to read something about our accomplishments or what we've been doing for the past 30 years. So briefly, accomplishments of water WRMC. The first thing we did is establish a bulkhead line, and we developed the stormwater ordinance back in 1979. And we constructed more than 150 structural stormwater management facilities. Established Pro and water quality gating stations, which provides data for management of stream flow in Pheasant Branch. Constructed the Confluence Pond, South Pond, and Lakeview Sedimentation Pond. And the Confluence Pond is probably the biggest accomplishments the city has done as far as controlling flood peak sediment and phosphorus. We developed the stormwater utility, and we helped develop plans for a number of channel and bank stabilization projects on Pheasant Branch. Developed and implement Tiedemann and Trigger Pond elevation control plan. And this one is developed, this one's tongue in cheek, developed Graber Pond elevation control plan. I don't quite accomplished that yet, but, precipitated and funding the regional hydrologic groundwater studies, developed floodplain maps twice. And just briefly, since stormwater practice were initiated, we decreased the annual sediment load from 2,300 tons to 170 tons, or 62% reduction. And the annual phosphorus load from 12,600 pounds to 7,100 pounds, for a 43% reduction since the Confluence Pond was constructed. And I sent you a copy of that report by Eric Booth, and that was a little bit grim. While we seemed like we're doing a good job, it doesn't look like it's going to be hard to achieve our goals long-term. Have you seen that report before, Ken?
Yeah.
Yeah. I sent a copy to Todd Stunbeck to get his take on it, and he hadn't gotten back to me. So that's it. So I think there's something about compliance, and you'll get into that, Eric. The next
Sure.
topic,
Yep. So the other documents
situation, I guess.
attached to this were an ordinance summary, which Warren just went through most of. Then there's a document that I had created last year when we were talking about ordinance revisions. The first part of this is kind of rehashing what Warren just went through. So I would just like to touch on these other two things. You know, the first part is mostly related to private development sites and what happens. The other big thing that we deal with, we have a permit from the DNR called an MS4 permit, and it sets a target for us on a citywide basis, what pollutant control we need to have. That was 40% 10 or 15 years ago. The Walker administration reduced that to 20%, and that's suspended sediment control. The MS4 permit has a whole bunch of requirements of what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to create an erosion control ordinance. We're supposed to conduct community outreach and education. I think there are 7 things that we're supposed to be doing. One of them is these maintenance requirements with private sites. So we force a private development to record a maintenance agreement that follows the title of the property. So it's a perpetual agreement where they promise to maintain the pond or biofilter or whatever they've done to control stormwater. Every year we have to file a report with the DNR that talks about our progress, and that includes road salt use, all kinds of pollutant controls, basically. That all stems from the Clean Water Act in the 70s, Nixon administration. More recently, there was a TMDL study for the Rock River, and we're now under more stringent requirements resulting from that. And that's where this phosphorus discussion comes in. So there's 3, the TMDL is divided into reach sheds, and it sets different targets for
Or
reach.
watersheds, to see.
Yeah.
It's a different word for it.
You know, the bulk of the city drains to Pheasant Branch. There's a decent chunk that drains to Lake Mendota without going through Pheasant Branch. And then there's a small amount that goes to Dorn Creek, which is farther north. There's also a chunk of the city that drains towards Black Earth Creek. That was not included in the TMDL. So the point I was making with these tables are that it's really the phosphorus requirements from the TMDL that are the strictest now. Even though the percentage is less, it's harder to capture the phosphorus because some of it is dissolved in the water. We can't capture it in a traditional wet, like a settlement basin, a wet detention pond. You have to either infiltrate it or filter it somehow, or do something really impressive like we talked about last month and that Jim's going to talk about later. When we were talking about ordinance adjustments before, if we hold a new development to our current ordinance requirements, we're still not capturing enough phosphorus as we need to. So every time we approve a new development, we're getting a little bit farther behind in phosphorus control. So that's something to think about too as we look at ordinance revisions. We cover this shortfall that we have with phosphorus performance we entered into an adaptive management agreement with MMSD, kind of with all the surrounding municipalities and Madison. We pay them a cash fee every year, and they're going out into the watershed trying to find phosphorus control practices that are cheaper in an ag setting than within the city. That's basically what's happening there. I don't know how many years that agreement is for offhand, but based on what Warren sent us all yesterday, it's not very optimistic that at the end of this adaptive management, where we could really have made progress towards improving water quality in Lake Mendota and farther downstream.
What are we paying MMSD?
$61,000 a year currently. It usually ticks up every year, just a little.
We could lower that if we do something to reduce the TSS, right?
Well, phosphorus.
Yeah. Well,
We could, but we could never create enough control to capture the phosphorus we need for $61,000.
This,
It's not even close.
this cost per pound of phosphorus we're paying is the best bargain in town.
Yeah, it's like $50 a pound.
And you can't build a practice
Keep
for
up with the
that.
practice.
No.
well, in the big picture, we're better off building a practice to get rid of the phosphorus.
True.
Well,
I mean, that is the goal.
theoretically, that number, that's supposed to be doing that. That 61,000. It's supposed to be reducing that phosphorus in the watershed.
Well,
In
we
the
saw,
farmers.
Todd Sudden's report this year, and we don't have a trend yet that it's definable
I agree.
that we're reducing phosphorus, so. And based on Eric Boost, there's so much phosphorus in the watershed, in addition to increased number of cows, the chances of us meeting that are slim.
Disagree.
So what happens after adaptive management has a sunset number of years, right? What happens after that? We just saved
I don't know.
$60,000 a year.
I don't know. It depends on if they can, I mean, the success will have to be what's monitored downstream of MMSD's discharge.
If they can't reduce phosphorus levels going in, show that they reduce phosphorus levels, they have to improve their sewage treatment plant.
That's correct, but then each one of us would also have to meet our reach targets upstream of that.
And we'll pay for the sewage treatment plant too.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Big time, yeah. So is that, I'm not sure where we are, Eric.
Well, unless there are questions on any of this, I'll just touch on that one, the memo I wrote about plans that we're reviewing. So very briefly, Warren asked me to look into whether or not the philosophy had changed of what types of plans we were reviewing. And I don't think it has. I went back and looked at a couple of years of records from before I got here, and it seems the same. We are, we're not looking at all stormwater management plans for all new developments. We're only looking at the funky ones where they're requesting fee in lieu, something that's really complex, or something that's been referred to by a committee or common council. I looked at those 2 years worth of records, and what did I come up with here? 36 permits and 15 reviewed by water resources. Given our workload or my workload, I recommend we do not expand the number of stormwater plans we're bringing before the committee.
So it increases your workload to bring more things to our attention.
Oh, sure. I spend a decent amount of time serving the commission.
Yeah.
And some of these, especially recently, our meetings have been going pretty late.
I looked at those two developments are taking place on Greenway Center, those two apartment complexes. Obviously, we haven't seen those, the senior living ones, and then Pond View 1 or 2 is being redone. I guess I would say that previously we would have seen those plans.
Okay.
it's up to you, I guess, and what the you want us to look at and if we provide any help. But
Well, you would have seen them. Why?
I don't know, just to show what was taking place.
Well, I don't know, Warren. There were 21 of them that you didn't see in this period that I looked at, and only 15 of them that you did. So I would say if they haven't shown us a stormwater plan yet for those pond redevelopments, I think they're on their second concept plan perhaps, but I haven't seen any stormwater details. I've had some discussions with their engineer, and mainly I'm concerned about keeping that building high enough relative to the new ESSER floodplain. So I don't, I said, keep your elevations up. That's really all I'm worried about. I don't think the pond in the pond buildings was part of a stormwater management plan, but I asked them to account for it as a depression in the existing condition, which would reduce their allowable runoff a little bit for the smaller storms.
Are you using the newest mapping that was done for floodplain mapping and giving those elevations to developers saying, it's not
Just-
regulatory, but here's the number that we calculated. for-
Advisory, yeah.
And so they're aware of that and
Yeah.
hopefully abide by it, just for their own self. benefit.
Well, I don't think they'd make it through plan commission if staff said, no, this is flood prone.
Right.
Based on our new model.
Right, okay, so they are providing a valuable
Right,
piece of information for you to use. Good, okay,
yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. That's good.
I think it's up to you, Eric, what you want to bring to us, or also the council, what they want us see us look at. So,
Yeah, if council referred something, I would bring it to you.
yeah,
But I think if they're meeting all of what we've told them to meet in the ordinance, aside from just you tracking what's going on in town.
I guess that was my interest, just to see
Comment.
what was being done by developers in redevelopment, but it's more of an interest since we're looking at different techniques and things like that. So it was just out of my personal interest. I don't, if you feel comfortable with their meeting the ordinance, I guess there's no other reason for us to see it.
I think you'll probably end up seeing that ponds one because it's
So there's
another one that's
there's
gonna.
a large complex just south of there that's being built now. I think it's senior living. It's two
On
different phases.
Holiday and John Q. Hammonds.
Guess I can't remember. It's right next to the pond development. Yeah.
Is it across the street from Marriott?
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Those guys met requirements. That was also kind of a green roof setup. But
Just
it's
driving
a-
around it, I don't see any stormwater control features, but they
Right.
may be.
There's gonna be a long basin alongside of John Q. Hammond's. There's two basins kind of in the back.
Is that site considered redevelopment? And it was a highly impervious site to start with, right? Before they,
It was a parking
Parking
lot,
lot.
I think,
Yeah.
maybe for the Marriott.
yeah,
Yeah.
it never got used, but it was parking surface.
Right,
So it's being treated as redevelopment, is that right?
yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the standards are different than new development.
That kind of sucks.
Well, it was paid before, it's
There's
paid
a bad
again.
development before, so we continue it.
Well, it's better than bad. It's not much.
Well, there's I think there's a whole swath of Greenway Station in that area that was where development started when the South Fork was rerouted and South Pond was built. And that's not under, the philosophy was that South Pond was providing rate control for that. And similarly for Confluence Pond. So that's something we can look at also, I suppose. with
The
an
whole
ordinance
Greenway
review.
Center was ushered in because the city wanted it built and they didn't want to, they made special deals for it. So they bypassed our requirements for it. And they kind of threw South Pond in there as a bone. It has made it happen.
On that note.
Yep. So
Next agenda item? Perhaps? No.
pardon?
Do you want to move to the next agenda
Yes,
item?
right. And that's, Jim, do you want to do make a presentation then on, I don't have a title for it.
I'd be glad to.
City of Madison.
City of Madison
projects for
phosphorus,
Yeah.
phosphorus.
enhanced phosphorus removal.
Can I run this from here?
Can you attempt to share?
I'm not logged. I'm on the Wi-Fi, but I didn't get to the Zoom meeting.
All right, well, open up. Log into the Zoom meeting as if you were at home.
Easier said than done.
Pull the appointment out of your
hang on. I got it. here.
email.
Hang on, I got it. Sorry to not done this before. Yeah, I get all this advertisement first. Where do we just connect? Sign up. Join. There it is. Thank. Meeting ID number. That's not what I want.
Let's just give you a link in that email. For a calendar appointment.
Oh, well, that would be quicker probably. $6:16. I don't want my audio on.
Yeah, make sure your mic and speakers are off.
All right. Share. All right, how we doing? Okay.
Looks good.
So a little bit of this got covered already with some of the stuff Warren and Eric presented, but phosphorus has been and is becoming more and more of a issue, as we all know. Lake Mendota had the earliest blue-green algae blooms, I don't know, on record this year or something like that. Is that right?
Yep.
I mean, it was ridiculous. It was May and
It actually even started in that first few days of April when we had that hot spell for just 2 days.
yeah. So that just doesn't happen, or at least hasn't. But I've been doing this. When I started in DNR in 1978, one of my work was watershed management, and we had a watershed management program to reduce runoff of phosphorus to Madison lakes. How many? It's 45, 50, whatever it is, a long time ago. Our lakes aren't in any better shape now than they were back then, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So I think everybody here knows this stuff. Phosphorus is a major factor in algae production in the freshwater lakes that we have. It's called a limiting factor. In Madison lakes, it's not coming from wastewater plants or sanitary waste. It's coming from surface runoff and in situ sediments. So that's the phosphorus that's already in the bottom of the streams and lakes, and the phosphorus coming in from the flowing water during runoff times. And then, as Eric mentioned, our phosphorus runoff, stormwater runoff from Middleton is regulated by this MS4 permit that we've had since 2004, something in that range. When we talk about phosphorus, there's a gazillion different ways to speciate it or divide it out. And we talk about a lot of different forms, and you've seen many more complex charts than this. I made it as simple as possible because that's for me, this is helpful. We talk about total phosphorus, and there's phosphorus that's attached to small particles and phosphorus that's actually dissolved in the water and doesn't settle out. And so this particulate phosphorus, which comes with runoff, can settle out in our stormwater ponds and basins and things like that we build, but it can also move back and forth between dissolved and particulate. So it gets real complicated real quick. All the regulations that the city is under and that are being used for these TMDLs is total phosphorus. That's all they cared about, was to reduce total phosphorus by a certain number to improve our lakes. But it gets real complicated real quick because of these different forms of phosphorus and what kind of management practices do and don't work for the different forms of phosphorus. And the fact that these things can go back and forth depending on the water chemistry, it can become, reavailable to the phosphorus. So I was going to show some quick graphs of data of when we talk about phosphorus, it varies considerably depending on the kind of land use in the watershed that is causing the runoff to occur. These bar charts are from USGS. They're based on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of data points monitoring these different kinds of land uses. And you see that in some cases, the orange, which is a dissolved fraction, is a very small part of total. And in some cases, it's a very large part of the total, such as from residential lands. It makes up, 50% or more of what total phosphorus would be coming off a site. You also might see that this park is a very large phosphorus concentration number, okay? And you say, my gosh, parks are the major source of phosphorus in our watersheds. Well, concentration wise, that might be true, but the volume of water that comes off is much less. The volume coming off from commercial and residential lands, of course, is much more per inch of rainfall than from a park. So even though the concentrations might be lower for some of these categories, the actual load that we call it, or the pounds of phosphorus getting to a lake, would still be, likely higher from these other land uses, like in this case, residential. But I'm going to spend a minute on this dissolved and total phosphorus, because this is why we're talking about this whole idea of other treatment forms, approaches than what we've been using in the past up until now. Another chart I'll show you is how seasonally this phosphorus numbers can change. This is from the same land use, but it's just simply the concentrations that were measured spring, summer, and fall. And again, you'll see what's going on in the fall with all your wonderful trees that you are pumping out here. They're raining phosphorus leaves onto the streets. That's what they do. And if they sit there and the rain comes, the leaves themselves may not move, but the water essentially creates a T, washes through the leaves and carries that phosphorus to the storm sewer and to the lakes and rivers. So in the fall, if we have a practice that settles phosphorus, a settling pond, while all this dissolved is going right through, it's not being trapped, it just flows right through and continues on down to the lake. And that's the shortfall of a lot of our stormwater management practices that we install. So most of our stormwater ponds, which is kind of the backbone of our system, is getting maybe around 50% of the total feed. there's a range, but that's kind of a target number. And to reduce, if we want to attack and reduce algae growth, the productivity in our lakes, we got to have a way to capture dissolved P. Okay. And so the city of Madison, several years ago, has done a couple of things to try to see what they can do to attack this dissolved phosphorus issue. And they've built, there's 2 bullet items there. They actually tried a pilot study on a stormwater pond down by the end of Glenway, where Glenway hits Monroe, thank you. There's a stormwater pond there that had some work done to try to install chemical treatment to reduce the phosphorus into that pond and thus reduce the phosphorus out of the pond by trapping the dissolved phosphorus. They've also did a fairly robust study on another concept of removing phosphorus directly from a creek water and putting cleaner water back in the creek. And this is a study I'm going to talk about here. And it refers back to what we got presented last month. And it's a technology that's been used elsewhere in the country. It's not new if you're in the Southeast. And also some Western states have been doing this for a while on stormwater. It's kind of a wastewater approach to stormwater management. And what I'm talking about here is adding something called a coagulant. And a coagulant is simply a chemical added that in this case causes dissolved phosphorus to precipitate or form matter, form clumps or particles that allow it to settle out. So it captures the dissolved fraction of phosphorus, that whole big 50% that we're missing, and puts it into a form that will allow it to settle out in a pond. The larger particles
Do you
settle.
harvest?
Excuse me?
Do you harvest the stuff that's settled out?
You're getting ahead of my talk.
Okay.
Typical students here, just jumping right in. We'll get to that. Yes, the answer is yes. This stuff that these coagulants are talking about, they're aluminum based for the most part, and there's various forms of that. But it's a chemical, it's a process that's been used in our drinking water supplies. Our wastewater treatment plants use this, been doing it for decades and decades and decades. The Romans did it to settle out water back in Roman history, back in the BC. So it's not a new technology, but it's a new application. So this is a concept of what Madison was thinking about for this Starkweather Creek. This never happened, or it hasn't happened yet. Maybe, who knows? The idea was this is Starkweather Creek on the east side of Madison. Divert the high flow water, let base flow go, capture the runoff times from the high flow, put it through a coagulant treatment system, allow that coagulant to settle into a settling pond, which is out there. The flock would settle out, and then the discharge, the treated water goes back into Starkweather Creek. Okay, so it's actually not treating, the storm sewer system. It's treating the river system. This has caused the DNR lots of headaches. They don't like doing this because it's treating waters of the state, and it's a big deal to regulatory agencies. And I understand where they're coming from. But this is the concept, and I'm just going to talk a little bit of what it took to decide if this was going to actually be feasible or not, and make sense or not. And to get to that, to come to that conclusion, we conducted runoff sampling at Starkweather Creek. We captured 6 events. We tested 5 different coagulants. I say we because I used to work for the company that was doing this contract work. We were making sure we count rainfall runoff times. We weren't trying to calculate loadings or even the concentrations. What we're trying to find is stormwater differs from place to place, as you saw from those earlier slides. The question to be answered was which coagulant might provide the best treatment for the kinds of water chemistry in that water body, because each water body has different chemistry. We captured spring, summer, fall, and each event got analyzed for 3 different coagulants, and we did a total of 5 coagulants over time over these events in 2015. You don't need to memorize these. This is the coagulants that we talked about. They're aluminum based, but there are various forms. These are commercial products you can buy. Wastewater plants buy these things by the truckload and use it for treating their wastewater facilities. These are the coagulants that we tested. They perform differently, depends on the chemistry of the water, the pH, the buffering capacity, all kinds of things that affect how well it's going to trap that phosphorus. We want to know if it's going to work in cold water in the spring and the fall, and in warm water in the midsummer. And we also wanted to make sure there wasn't a pH change, because pHs can change the downstream chemistries a lot with heavy metals, aluminum, other things that can become re-available to the environment. We wanted to make sure there wasn't any pH impact from adding this stuff. Each of the runoff events that were tested for the coagulants had a series of parameters tested. You can see what these are. The main focus, of course, was to see how much total phosphorus and dissolved phosphorus was removed after this coagulant got added. But we also wanted to know about if there was any more aluminum in the water after you got added. Was there going to be more aluminum in the runoff treated area? So those are things we looked at. So this was all bench scale testing that was being done. We captured the water in the stream, took it to the state lab of hygiene, split these samples into separate bottles. You'll see some pictures here in a second, and did analyses of those parameters that you just saw over some time periods to mimic the time the water would sit in that pond. It would sit in that pond in that schematic drawing for a certain amount of time and then settle out. Well, how much phosphorus was going to be taken out of the water, how much was going to be left. So here's just a picture of the jars that were from one coagulant that was tested. This is that hour and a half after adding coagulant to all the jars had the same water in them. This jar is halfway filled because we analyzed those parameters at time 0, and then the rest of these are going to be analyzed at different times throughout the test. And these bottles also contain different concentrations of the aluminum. Okay, so what you're seeing here is that the raw water is cloudy. The water with the lowest concentration of aluminum is still kind of cloudy at an hour and a half, but you can see some clarity forming for these other bottles that had a little bit higher concentration of aluminum. And the idea was to figure out which concentration was most effective. So at an hour and a half, it looked like this. At 24 hours, it looked like this, where the raw water still had, you can still see the settling was not 100%, but was certainly clearer. But you can just visually see the flock that's forming. This is the flock that stripped out the soluble phosphorus and settled it to the bottom of the jar. And then you can measure the volume of flock by the constant. These are 3 different types of coagulant types and concentrations of each of the coagulants. And so you kind of get an idea that certain concentrations strip out more phosphorus over time, and it may be more effective in achieving your phosphorus reduction goal. So now we're capturing both total and a good chunk of the dissolved. Okay. Forget this chart, but the conclusions were, we found phosphorus removals. Remember, I told you the settling might get you 50% in that range, just pure settling. With the coagulant, we were getting consistently, 80% and above. And we found a concentration of the aluminum that seemed to be the sweet spot for getting the most out for the aluminum that you're adding. And we, for purposes of our calculation of how much benefit this thing could provide, we used a target of 85% phosphorus reduction, total phosphorus reduction, as opposed to being about 50% total phosphorus reduction without any coagulant being added. We made a recommendation on the product to use, aluminum chlorohydrate, with a certain concentration to use. We chose that product. It had all of them performed pretty well. And this one just happened to be a little bit better and had a little cheaper cost to it, actually. none of these tests showed dissolved aluminum. It was lower post-treatment than pre-treatment. So the water coming in from the watershed has aluminum in it already. Aluminum is very abundant in our water system and the soil and everywhere else. So the actual aluminum concentrations were less after treatment, even though you're adding this alum.
Got tired.
It got tied up also, yeah. Sulfates can be an issue when you use something called alum, aluminum sulfate. There's concerns that in some lake systems, sulfates have a negative impact on mercury, and you can describe the mercury cycle if you wish. But we didn't find any sulfates for these. That's why we're testing for that. pH didn't change. And then alum has an actual kind of a higher freezing temperature. It can be problematic because it freezes at above 32. So if you're in the late fall or early spring, it can freeze up in your system if you're treating your system. ACH has a lower temperature. I think that's all I've got. I wanted to be real quick and just kind of give you a flavor. If the city or anybody for that matter is thinking about going this direction, it's not a small thing. Okay,
No.
it's a major effort. It would require a lot of permits, a lot of DNR involvement. They don't have a standard on this right now. That's what I mentioned last month. There is a standard being worked on that I'm on the committee for. It's called a Technical Advisory Committee, SOC committee, Standard Oversight Council. And maybe in a year, there'll be a written document that says, if you want to use coagulant, here's what you have to do. And if you do it this way, DNR will approve it more than likely. And we'll have standards to know how much benefit it's going to give us. Okay. That's at least a year away to get to that point. That's not to say we couldn't try something on a pilot study basis beforehand, and get DNR involvement and ask the question, can we try this out and work through a process to get it tested? It's not inexpensive. When the city of Madison finished this study on Stark weather, stop sharing here. It came up with a cost similar to, on a pound per phosphorus basis, of what a settling basin gets, a new settling basin on a new site. Okay, just building like a detention pond. Yeah, anywhere. But the detention pond, again, is getting half the phosphorus for that cost. We're getting 85–90% of the phosphorus for that same cost. So to me, this is a promising thing. If we're going to get serious about stormwater management and the lake's conditions, to me, this is something that's sooner or later going to have to be become part of the package. But
you have to have a place to have the settling pond.
You have to have a settling pond. What you said before, yes, that example was perfect. It was a quarry pit.
Yeah.
It would settle in there, stuff would accumulate, and yes, you would have to hydraulically remove that flock and get it out and dry it and landfill it. Or sometimes people are using that for soil amendments and things like that. But yes, phosphorus doesn't just disappear, right?
Yeah.
It's still sitting there.
Yeah, well, I heard about it at Lakes and Watershed, and they did not mention the settling pond. So I was concerned about dumping all that aluminum in where it didn't seem like it was being gotten rid of.
Lakes in Wisconsin and elsewhere have been treated with alum and aluminum compounds since the 60s or 70s. Okay. Where you've got a lake that's green and people don't like it, and a lake association or lake district gets together, and they can, with the proper permits, apply this stuff directly to a lake. Okay. It clears the lake, it settles to the bottom. I think somebody here who knows a little bit more about it than I do. Jump in.
No, I think, it clears it. It in some systems can essentially bind up a lot of that phosphorus that would otherwise be exchanging and become available. So it can be a really effective, but I think there's some questions about the longevity, right? Because then new sediment comes in on top of it. So.
Basically contaminating that area with a lot of aluminum phosphate that builds up.
Yeah, you're immobilizing it essentially.
It's
But
pretty
it's
inert
still-
and does
it's
not
still
get back into
there.
the system.
Yeah.
So there's lakes that have been treated in Wisconsin back in the 70s and 80s that are still, do need retreatment. But you know, the biota, as far as I know, and the fish life can thrive still in those
Okay.
conditions. But it's not doing anything to me. It doesn't make sense to do this in a stormwater pond, to treat the pond. You want to treat the runoff coming into the pond.
Mhm.
Yeah, to treat the pond is just, the pond is not a water resource in itself, right? I mean, people like walking around it and all that, but it's a pollution control device. Even though the birds like it and we like
Yeah.
walking around it, but it's a pollution control practice. It's not a water, it's not a, water resource in my definition of the word.
Has anybody thought about a treatment builder, for example, all that water coming in from the north, right? So has anybody roughed out what that might take?
I think there has been some rough numbers like that. I think that's, like Yahara River, Pheasant Branch, all these tributaries. To me, that's the long-term solution.
But but the lakes are probably more important.
The
than
lakes
streams,
themselves
right?
still have a lot of sediment, phosphorus load in the lake itself, in situ, right? So I don't know how long it would take to get that out of the system. If you had zero input to Lake Mendota starting tomorrow, how long would it take to get
Yeah,
the
I
resident
think
stuff out?
hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And part of that too is just there's sort of this feedback with the phosphorus makes the algae, right? And then when it settles down and dies, all that decomposition uses up the oxygen, which then makes the chemical environment to release the phosphorus again.
Yeah.
So it's this just perpetual cycle. And so that cycle to essentially dampen itself will take hundreds of years.
So the answer is live with it.
But don't add more.
But don't add more,
Yeah.
right?
How much is coming into Middleton from?
What's
all
that?
How much phosphorus is coming in from all that farmland northwest of here?
100%, compared to the whole watershed? Or what are you
Yeah,
asking?
or, well, compared to what, within the bounds of Middleton, the land
Oh.
in the city limits, how much?
Well, North Fork loading is, lot
Well, number
more.
one, we don't have the data on that because if you get into an apartment ministry, it doesn't sample the whole city of Middleton. It's-
no,
so
but you can compare South Fork to North Fork loading.
you can separate South Fork from North Fork, right?
Yeah,
But in South Fork is, a lot of it's Madison,
Lavins, Madison.
higher percentage is Madison, so.
But I guess there's more coming in from the North Fork than the South Fork.
By far about four times.
Yeah,
four or
that's what I
five
was
times more.
thinking.
It's twice the drainage, 50% more drainage area. I think the
a
loading is
lot of-
probably
Dairy cows.
4 or 5 times more. But, Todd Sundbeck's they got guidance stations on all the tributaries to Lake Mendota. So we've had, 10 years of data, 5 years of data, somewhere.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of information where the phosphorus is coming from. And we got practices that are put in place, so we could see if there are improvements or not. But every year is different. We have wet years and in 2018 and 19, then we got real dry years. And it's surprising we have that algae bloom now because there was no big runoff event this winter that I could remember.
No, there wasn't, but the zebra mussels, we think, have really changed when those the diatom bloom in the spring happens. So essentially the cyanobacteria just didn't have the competitors and then it got hot. And that particular cyanobacteria just loves, once it gets above 12 degrees Celsius, it just flourishes. It's many competing stressors
I thought maybe zebra mussels would clean up, but I guess zebra mussels don't eat blue-green algae.
No, in fact, they kind of preferentially spit it back out. In fact, they might be
make
making
it
it worse.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we just have to get some species that likes blue-green algae, and don't ducks like it?
Hmm.
I'm not sure.
No, ducks eat the zebra mussels, like, or some ducks.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And they take them and then they replant them some other place. Yeah. Well, I think that it concludes our agenda for tonight. And our discussion is possible topics for next month. You probably got somewhat of a list, Eric. I don't know.
I think Steve Gatfield may be back with an update on the flood study. And I'm hopeful to bring back another salt discussion.
Okay, good.
Just buy all the farms.
It's another issue like phosphorus that I can't see how we're going to solve it.
What do they grow up there?
Do, you know,
Corn.
what would it take
Cow.
to start the discussion on the ordinance revisions?
What?
That's too big of a topic to even think about right now.
I don't know. I mean, Eric took
But that
one
is some of the best
stab at it a couple
quality
years
farming
ago
in
and
the country.
put some things down.
Just north of the Middleton area.
I don't think the things that we talked about tonight are huge
So
things.
that
You put
makes
them in
it
there.
a
I
little
don't know
hard to
what kind of
justify.
review it has to go through. I mean, we can make suggestions like the 200-year flood or
Right.
the DNR
Development.
file for
We could develop
instead of 1981 or
That's a really,
add
That's
volume
worse.
control.
We could turn.
I'm not sure what it
You know,
takes.
you guys are live mic'd. Ken and Susan.
It's being recorded, so it's.
Okay,
I'm sorry, Warren, what? How much work to put it all
I don't know how much
together?
work it is on you're, you know, we could handle it on our end. That's up to you. If
Right. No, it's on the top of the list. I can't make any promises as to
I
when I can
understand.
get it back. A few months. I
So-
would hope.
could we do have a working session, just take the ordinance and make suggestions and then give it back to you?
I don't remember what I gave you the last time. I think I gave you a markup and like a track changes version.
Could we just take that and add suggestions to it and give it back or something?
Sure. You mean outside of a,
Can you
Of a
email that
meeting?
out again? Just-
Or
Yeah,
have a work group of our committee formed to make suggestions and give it back to you?
yeah. Maybe next month, we put it on the agenda to form a work group.
Okay,
okay.
Susan, what's the process for changing ordinances? Does it have to go to L&O
yes,
so that they would have to approve it and
They
then,
would have
and
to
then
approve.
council would approve it
and
after
then
that?
council,
Where does it go first?
license and ordinances,
License and ordinance committee,
which means we would need to do a presentation to them.
right?
I assume the city attorney gets a crack at it first, right?
Yeah, well, the city
And
attorney would have a crack.
He
too,
would have a
but
crack at it too, yeah.
In terms of approval,
Yeah.
got to get through L&O.
Okay, that's after the attorneys had all their input.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't remember how many years it took us to do the first ordinance in 1979. I think it was 3 or 4 years.
I
We
mean,
went back and forth with lawyers
mhm.
and it wasn't that complex. I mean, we just talked about essentially
Well,
flood
right.
discharge
Yeah,
and whatever.
And this is educating also the attorneys. Unless they can give it to someone with more knowledge.
Yeah, I think we had like 6 or 8 pages and now we ended up with like 50 pages. So I think whatever reason.
I'll bring up something for a future meeting possibly, or just to let you guys know too, that some older persons have been meeting with the town of Springfield with some of their concerns and how Springfield and city of Middleton are working together on some things. One of the topics of discussion that they're interested in is stormwater runoff and they had some suggestions on building berms in some of the farmland.
The town had these suggestions? or-
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they had some ideas. Nothing solid yet, but just, I'm assuming people from this committee or a couple of us could be designated to work with them on some ideas about water that's coming into city of Middleton from town of Springfield. It's kind of further up the stream. And I don't know if that's stormwater or if that's this committee.
We were aware of some discussions and there was a joint group being formed, but last I heard, and it was gonna be Jim and I that were sitting on that.
Okay.
With Lisa.
At least,
Last we heard, they wanted to delay meeting until after the elections.
Yeah, and
Haven't
we've
heard of
met,
things
we've
since then.
met since the election.
County issue.
So,
okay.
well, Alder people with a couple members of their town board.
It's
Okay.
more by the
So, and
county.
again, just a rough outlines of things that we wanted to talk about. So nothing in detail.
Randall, I think some of this needs to be worked with the county who has jurisdiction over the whole county.
Okay, and I don't know, because again, we didn't get into a lot of detail.
Yeah. But I
So,
know the county's
the county
concerned
would
about
want
all
their-
these issues.
yeah.
And
And I don't know if it's a matter of the town and the city coming up with ideas and going together to the county to say, here's what we want to do. It might be that direction, so.
Yeah. But the county is also doing a lot to encourage farmers to plant native prairie plant buffers along all the streams and so on. So
Right. Yeah.
Who's leading that on council informally, if not?
Lisa,
I was in on that discussion. And I'm not sure, I haven't talked to people from the town yet, but Brian Gatto might have some ideas too,
Okay.
city administrator, of how to progress.
I'll talk to Brian.
Okay.
That's there. Yeah, I thought that was going and I guess we're in the dark.
Okay.
Mhm.
okay, if there's anything else, not, meeting's over.
I think the word's adjourned, but I guess you could say.